we've now come on to the star of the evening, Mr. Hughes, here we are. The annual audit letter. He's got all been waiting for this. But John Hooper will take us to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Chair. We've got a couple of reports in front of us. I was proposing to take you through both at the same time. We can take questions after that. So we've got the annual audit letter for 2012-13. We've also got the grant certification report. So just starting off with the annual audit letter, I think it's fair to say overall quite a positive report. The accounts process concluded a month earlier this year than it did previous year. You will remember back in the summer the Audit Committee took the audited accounts in July as opposed to previously taking it after the summer break, so some progress from that perspective. The accounts were unqualified and we also noted we've done some money indicators sort of read against those criteria. So that just in terms of the grant claims, only 5 now, so gradually reducing year on year, very limited amount actually. So audited of those, 1 was qualified, the housing and council-based benefit claim. I suppose the important point to note there was whilst there was an error picked up, it didn't result in a loss in subsidy, so it wasn't something that triggered a penalty from government. Notwithstanding that, we have got an action plan in place with the representatives team to look at improving the quality of that.
Is that grants?
That was grants, yes. And then just in terms of feedback, Paul, you might want to expand, but we've got some of the 12-13 sub-areas, 13-14 still to be finalised. So that's all I was going to say. I'm going to Paul might want to expand on a couple of things before we take questions.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the top billing. Much appreciated. So just to set this into context briefly, this is the annual audit letter. So this is really the sort of highly summarised wrap-up of the year just gone. I wasn't proposing to go into any detail on the accounts audit, which John's just referenced there, on the value for money audit, on the basis that you had a detailed report on that in July, which was discussed and debated then. So what I propose to do here is just to touch upon the areas in this that are new, based on the work that was completed since then. So those areas within here are really around the grant certification that John's just touched upon, and the conclusion of the public challenge matters that kicked off during the accounts audit and have been concluded on only very recently. But as John says, overall very positive picture from the accounts and value for money audit. In terms of the public challenge matters, so we received 5 separate objections on the accounts, which weren't material to the accounts, and so didn't stop us from signing off the accounts in August, but did need to be dealt with through the formal objections process that we abide by, set down by the Audit Commission and the Audit Commission Act. So those 5 objections, 4 of them were to do with parking, and 1 was to do with interim staffing. We dealt with all of those and ultimately concluded on those, issuing 2 separate letters to the elector as a single elector. So we sent 2 separate letters, 1 to do with the 4 parking objections and 1 to do with the interim staffing objection. Effectively, we said that we weren't reporting in public interest, we weren't applying to the High Court for income expenditure to be ruled invalid. Notwithstanding that, we did through the work identify with the council there were some areas of improvement, and we brought those improvements with the council, particularly around the management of the NSL contract. We're going to be following up that as part of our 13-14 audit. So effectively the conclusion of those objections on the 17th of January then allowed us to finally certify the audit closed. So it's now done, dusted, signed, sealed and delivered. That's the 12-13 audit.
How does that compare with the time we did last year? Are we ahead of?
The certification clause is a little bit of a technicality, because effectively all of the work, the reals of audit work that we do on the accounts was earlier than last year. It was a month earlier than last time round. But you can't certify an audit closed until you've closed off any objections.
So from a council's point of view, the officers have provided you with all the information you needed within a very promptly.
Yeah, and indeed around the objections, throughout the summer, officers were prompt in providing me with the information I needed to begin investigating the elector matters. But the process does take a long time to draw to conclusion because we've got to take our own legal advice, work it all through a process, consult quite heavily on it just to make sure it's rock solid in terms of replying back to objectors. So we effectively had taken this long, went at some point probably in around August, September time, was entirely out of the hands of the council's officers. It was all really down to us dealing with sharing things with the elector, getting things back from the elector in response to what we shared, further considering those, taking legal advice. That, you know, it's a fairly sort of intensive process working through objections, and so to have 5 in one audit in 1 year is quite unusual in my experience.
Thank you, Chairman. 5 objections, how many objectors?
1.
How much does it cost for you to...
Sorry, that's the point, Councillor Raymond, which comes under really the question which we will ask you.
Yes.
You can ask if you wish. The audit fees are here.
Yeah.
Okay, yes.
Are here, and when you say
Put it another way.
May I
It
suggest?
takes considerable time and effort to answer these objections.
It does. Once something qualifies as an objection, you go into a quasi-legal process that takes time and effort.
I'm surprised there isn't a cut-off where you have to have a minimum number of signatories to an objection before you take it on board, but there isn't, is there?
Only one. But I mean, I think the question is, which I gave you notice of.
Yeah, I'll come on to that, that's fine.
Yes.
No problem. So that's on the objection side of things. On the grant side of things, as John mentioned, there's an improved performance overall for the council in terms of the certification of the grants. One remaining qualification around housing benefits, which isn't unusual. A lot of housing benefits claims get qualified across London every year. You get into a situation, the volume of transactions processed through, you get into a situation of the rules of the certification. If you find a certain number of errors, you then have to do a load more testing, which invariably results in more errors. And if you get to a point whereby you're effectively going to be going forever and a day, you qualify, otherwise you'll be auditing the thing all year round. As John mentioned, crucially, it hasn't resulted in any loss of subsidy to the council, which is the important thing. Moving on to fees then, so overall the main audit itself came in on fee, as it has to. The pensions fund audit, we did have to charge more for. We did mention that back in July when we brought the report in, because there was additional work needed on that. And we agreed with management that basically to get the pensions fund accounts prep process as smooth as the main accounts audit process, and then we'll be okay on that front. And onto the issue of fees for the objection. There's a fairly convoluted process by which these fees are now approved. So we incur costs in dealing with these objections. We then have to discount those down to the Audit Commission's rates, which we've done. We then submit that to the Audit Commission saying, here is a fee variation request for London Borough of Barnet based on all this work that we had to do. The Audit Commission then sits on that for some time and stews on it, asks us clarification questions. We go back, they ask us some more clarification questions, and ultimately they have the power to determine what that fee will be. That can be any number of answers. It can be, we accept what you've said, we know you've done a load of work on this, it's what you've submitted, or they might say, actually we think it should be a different number to that. So I can't tell you exactly what number they will come back with. The figure that we are putting into them is around the 40,000 mark, which is the discounted down. So the cost to us more than that, we discount down by 40%. Against the commission's, pardon me?
How much was the discount down? 40%?
Yeah, because you know the scale rates went down 40%.
Oh yeah, so the real cost was 70,000.
So the same thing. That's how much cost goes on the clock from us in dealing with that. That gets discounted down, and the commission determines whether that's acceptable to them or not. So I mean,
is the Audit Commission still in bid?
Still,
Are the audit commission still doing this?
there is, they're effectively contract monitoring on the public audit contracts. That's the sort of residual bit of the commission. That's
Still there?
pretty much what they do, yeah.
Right, it's been abolished.
So these are all the sort of big reports and things, we do all of those things now.
So was the cost of Barnet 70,000 or 40,000?
No, the cost of buying what the commission says it is.
They're suggesting it's discounted at 40,000, but it hasn't been finalised yet.
Oh, okay.
Did it mention 79 to 40?
Well, I mean, effectively that, I thought I'd just explain how the process works. Actually, the only figure you'd ever see would be the 40 figure.
Oh, I see. So who pays the extra 30, or is that?
That's effectively just cost of the contract for us. So. But, just explaining how much is the cost of doing the thing. There's a substantial cost in dealing with objections is the summary.
So these are, Mr. Hughes, these are objections to the accounts. So
Yes.
This is objections to the accounts rather than one of our members of the public being dissatisfied by saying they've actually made a formal objection.
Yeah. I mean, what happens is, and you sit here with a particularly active electorate in Barnet. What happens? You have a lot of correspondence with electors around various things that they're not happy with, and generally speaking, well, it's up to me to decide whether I take any notes of those things. I have no duty to go back to the electors, but as a courtesy, you go back and you say thank you for this, I'll consider that in the context of my audit. If there's something in it that's of interest and direct relevance to the audit, then it's up to me to decide whether I go into that and look at that, and that's entirely down to my discretion as your engagement lead. However, if something meets the definition of an objection, and there are certain requirements in the Audit Commission Act around whether something is an objection or not an objection. Once something triggers being a valid objection, we then go into this process, and that's when you get into a fairly long drawn out affair. Now often you can deal with things through discussion back and forth before you get to that, and sometimes you can head off not having objections by having a sort of dialogue, which is what we always try to do, because it goes into a long drawn out affair otherwise. But occasionally, if someone is minded to make an objection and has the capacity to make one properly, then I just have to deal with it.
Can you give us an example of one of these objections at all?
So yeah, these objections this year were around effectively that the council has lost money from moving into the NSL parking contract, that the council should declare, I should apply to the High Court to declare parking income as unlawful on the basis of this contract. Various sort of things. The council should be trying to collect money through parking. This is what it's all the fact against such requirements.
Would that be in the auditor's role to determine whether that's lawful or not? Surely that's something that should be taken by a legal department.
Well, yeah, we have sort of clear our legal role on these things. So effectively, we say, we ask the question, or we manage to say, I would like you to apply to the High Court to say that this, which is in the Act that we work to. So if you've done something as a council, and so that looked like it might have been legal in terms of income or expenditure in those accounts that we're talking about, and somebody raised that with me, and I thought that actually it did look like it was potentially unlawful, and it was material and everything else. We're not talking about small things here. There's always a materiality, reasonableness test, and there's always a test around the cost of applying to the High Court, and that cost which would fall on by taxpayers, whether it was worth doing that for what we were talking about. So there's always that test. But if there is an evidence-based case, and I'll take my own legal advice as to that being unlawful, then auditors have in the past applied to the High Court to declare something unlawful. It's not something you do lightly.
It sounds like a very complex process.